good evening, everyone. Welcome to our talk. Let's talk about social anxiety, the paradox of social anxiety in COVID-19. So I have here with me my colleague, Tim.
Hello.
And I'm Pauline. And together we are both clinical psychologists and psychologists from Viria Community Services. So today's talk is brought to you by Temasek Foundation as part of their Stay Prepared initiative. So the Stay Prepared initiative helps to prepare the Singapore community for emergencies like major accidents, natural disasters, pandemics, severe haze, or terrorist attacks. And it is afforded by the Temasek Emergency Preparedness Fund and managed by Temasek Foundation. So we briefly introduced ourselves earlier, and really the objective of today's forum is really to help improve or increase mental health awareness during COVID-19 and even after COVID-19. So we thought that it'd be important to talk about some of the very common mental health conditions that people are normally experiencing and the impact of both COVID-19 and post-COVID-19 on their mental health conditions. Right? So the format for today's talk, I think some of you are really familiar with our series already. So we would be kind of sharing some content first and maybe sharing some of our experiences and some tips and tricks to kind of cope with social anxiety today. But feel free to, interact with us in the chat box and type any of the comments or questions in the chat box. And then we do have, a Q&A section at the end of the talk. So we would respond to a lot of questions then. But we also do have two moderators with us today, Celeste and Natasha, who will be answering some of the questions and comments as well in the chat box. So feel free to, interact with them as well. Some ground rules. So like we mentioned, we will be recording the session today. So, if you could provide your consent on the screen as soon as it pops up, that would be great. Also, as we mentioned, we have moderators, so they'll be also monitoring the chat and they might have to remove some participants who type inappropriate comments in the chat box, just to give us a more safe and conducive environment for learning. So moving on to our overview for today's talk, the first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to kind of talk about what is social anxiety and, what is social anxiety, how is it different from a disorder, what keeps social anxiety going, and strategies to overcome social anxiety. So before, not before, but without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Tim to explain a bit more of this.
Thanks, Pauline. Hi, everyone. My name is Tim, as Pauline said. We thought that maybe the first thing that would be good for us to talk about would be the signs and symptoms of social anxiety. So some of us might be thinking, might have questions like, do I have social anxiety? Do I have a different form of anxiety? Do I have anxiety at all? So we thought that, we will discuss first what some of the signs and symptoms are so that maybe we are a bit clearer. So I guess what we have right here on the screen is four kind of quite typical signs of social anxiety. So we can go through them one by one. The first one is a fear of social situations. The second one is having this fear of being socially embarrassed or humiliated in some way. Yeah, that's also quite common for those of us with social anxiety. The third one is people with social anxiety tend to avoid social situations or they endure it, but with very, very intense distress. Okay, and the last one is that this fear that you experience when you're in a social situation is out of proportion to the actual threat. Okay, so these are the kind of four signs, I would say the key features of someone with of social anxiety. I guess in a nutshell, to summarize it, that's the kind of picture. The idea is that we have got like a spotlight on us. That's kind of how it feels like when someone has got social anxiety. Yeah. So that's for the signs of social anxiety, but what are the accompanying physical symptoms, right? So if you look at the bottom of the slide, we have listed a few physical symptoms. They can be blushing or feeling that the face is quite hot. That can happen sometimes. The second one is like shivering or trembling. That's quite a common symptom for people with who experience social anxiety as well. And the third one that we have here is a fast heart rate. Yeah, so I wonder whether some of you might be able to identify with some of these physical symptoms that you feel in social situations. So I guess we're going to have a poll, and we're going to find out which of these symptoms have you experienced before. I wonder whether the poll comes up on your screen and you can key in your answers, and then let's have a look to see what are the most common symptoms of social anxiety that we have here today. Okay, I see some of you responding. Thank you so much for your active participation. Yeah, that's really nice. We've got a nice range. Yeah, we just wait a few more seconds. Yeah, thank you all for your responses. If I'm reading this correctly, it looks like heart palpitations is the top one. Is that right? Followed by sweating. Yeah, that can be a very common one. Followed by trembling or shaking. Yeah. And then shortness of breath and chills or hot flushes. Yeah. So there's quite a, so I guess what this shows is that there's quite a variety of physical symptoms that we can feel when we are in social situations. Yeah. And some of these symptoms, just to say, they are quite normal. All of us can feel these symptoms from time to time. Yeah. So that's helpful. I hope that we get a good sense of what the different symptoms are for those of us with social anxiety. Yeah. Let's talk about some common situations and triggers for social anxiety. Let's have a look at the first picture that comes up. Yeah. So I'm not sure if you can guess, but a very common situation that triggers social anxiety in us is when we meet new people. Yeah. The second one is public speaking. So this is also definitely, I think most of us probably can identify with that when we are in such situations. Everybody can hear our voice. Everybody's looking at us. We can feel that anxiety. So that can be another common trigger for social anxiety. And quite related to that, we've got a third picture here, which is when we are basically at the center of attention. So I don't know whether any of us have experienced that before. It could be at a party, it could be at a meeting, but we kind of feel it when we are speaking, maybe, or when everybody is looking at us. We can feel quite fearful, quite embarrassed, quite anxious. So these are three common situations. I wonder whether you could type in the chat box. Can anyone else think of any other situations that can trigger social anxiety? I wonder if you could type some of them into the chat box and we can have a look. Okay, yeah, that's something that maybe we can discuss later, perhaps. That's a really good question, Tony.
Tim, I wonder whether you've experienced any situations of social anxiety before.
Yeah, I certainly have. I think particularly when I speak in like bigger than anything bigger than a small group. I think I can feel when everybody's eyes are on me. I think I can start to feel some of the physical symptoms. I've certainly felt that before. I wonder what about the rest of us here. Buying food, yeah, that can be quite an anxiety-provoking experience, certainly. The spotlight effect, yeah, Nicholas. That's I think exactly what we were sharing just now. The spotlight effect, where everybody's looking at us and we feel very nervous. Yeah, certainly. Sarah, everyone knowing each other in a social situation except you. Yeah, we can feel like the odd one out, right? And this sense that everyone is maybe looking at us in a different way, that can be quite stressful. Yeah. Not knowing something you think you should know and having to ask someone. Yeah, that can be quite a tricky situation as well, certainly. Yeah, and in a crowded places as well, Mandy. Yeah, that's certainly another example. Yeah, in a foreign land and among extroverted people. Yeah, I quite like that, because sometimes when we are a bit quieter, maybe we can have the sense that we are kind of the odd one out in a way. Everybody else is engaging and everyone else seems to be enjoying ourselves. But maybe if we are a bit quieter, maybe it can feel like, oh, maybe something is wrong. Everybody's looking at me. So yeah, certainly. Thanks everyone for your very active participation. It's really nice to see some of your responses.
Yes, so I think right now we want to kind of pull up a poll as well to kind of see how common people feel anxious in a social situation, because it does sound from the chat box, right, team, that quite a lot of people experience social anxiety in many common social situations. And I feel that, from hearing from you as well, it sounds like it's pretty common. So let's have a look at, how many people here actually experience those things.
Yeah. Okay. So most of us, so agree, strongly agree. So yeah, I guess we can see from the poll that that actually social anxiety perhaps is a lot more common than we think. Yeah, I think sometimes when sometimes we can think that it's quite uncommon and like we are kind of different from everyone else, but actually we can see from the poll it's actually quite common to experience social anxiety. Yeah, and actually we're going to see in the next slide. I think everyone has answered already. Thanks everyone. We're going to see in the next slide actually just how common it is in the world. So we picked a study that was published in 2017. It's called the World Mental Health Survey, and these are some kind of statistics that we know about research done on this area. So the first thing to say is that actually the age of onset tends to be between the age of 11 to 25. I'm not really sure whether that will surprise some of us or whether that's something that we were expecting. But that's certainly what the research says. So the first time we kind of experience this social anxiety tends to be at a fairly young age, I suppose. Yeah. The second thing is that the research shows that in general, females tend to be at a slightly higher risk than males. That's another thing that research has shown. And the third thing, which is very much related to the poll that we did earlier, is that the lifetime prevalence is approximately 4%. That means in the span of a whole lifetime, 1 in every 25 people end up with some kind of social anxiety at some point in their life. So again, I don't really know whether that's something that surprises you, whether that's kind of higher than what you expected or lower. But I think certainly it shows that there are far more people out there who do experience social anxiety that maybe we don't often talk about. Yeah. Okay, so the next thing is social anxiety sometimes doesn't, I suppose, exist kind of on its own. Social anxiety can also be accompanied by other symptoms. Yeah, and what are these other symptoms? So sometimes social anxiety can be accompanied by panic attacks. That can happen because we're very anxious and our body starts to shiver, tremble, and that can lead to a panic attack. Social anxiety can also be accompanied with this fear of going out of the house because you don't really want to meet people. You feel like just staying indoors. That can sometimes happen. The third one is worry. So a constant kind of worry how we're being evaluated by others. What should I say? What shouldn't I say? And also low mood. So, if we don't maybe feel like interacting with people so much, then sometimes we can maybe stay in, not meet our friends so much. And sometimes that can be one of the ways in which that can trigger a episode of low mood, and we start to feel quite down. And the same goes for low self-esteem as well. When we are socially anxious and maybe people notice, then that sometimes can make us feel very, very bad, and we kind of lose confidence. Yeah. So maybe this is just to get a sense as to some of the other difficulties that people with social anxiety might also have. Yeah. I hope this is helpful.
So we're going to watch a video, just kind of see what social anxiety looks like. I think just before we do that, just a warning that I think the volume is quite loud. So if you're on earpiece, be prepared to kind of like remove them or remove one side.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah. I hope you enjoy the video.
Could I get someone to read the last paragraph?
Me!
Victor, let's give someone else a chance today, shall we? There is going to be a skit performance, and we need a narrator. Who would like to do it?
Good morning.
Victor, would you like to introduce the story?
Okay, so we tried to pick a video that would kind of maybe give us a sense of what feeling the anxiety in front of people on stage might look like. And I wonder whether any of you actually spotted the video. Some of you might have actually seen that advert on Channel 5, I believe. I wonder whether any of you have seen it. And we thought we would use that video as an example. And so the question that actually we had is for everyone to think about, what thoughts do you think might be going through the young boy's mind when he wanted to, when he was trying to speak, but was finding some difficulty? What kind of thoughts do you think was going through his mind? Some of us want to write some of the thoughts in the chat box so that we can have a think about what sort of thoughts would be going through his mind at that time. Fear, certainly. That's certainly an emotion that he was feeling. Paise, blank, So maybe thoughts like, I'm going blank, I can't remember what to say. Everyone is laughing at me. Nicholas, exactly. Can't think, I can't think. That's really nice. So I think what's interesting and what we're going to see right after this actually, and what Pauline is going to share with us, when we have these very anxious feelings in us, I forgot my line as well, Wesley. It can trigger a lot of different very, very scary thoughts in our minds at that time, and we kind of freeze, I suppose. And what we're going to see in the next segment is how our thoughts are actually linked to some of our feelings, so the feelings of fear, and also how it impacts our attention as well. So hold the example of the video in mind as we go through the next segment.
Thanks, team. And I think there are quite a lot of really good responses. Right, in the chat box. I'm just gonna kind of carry on from what team was sharing. Just kind of see what happens when we feel social anxiety in a situation and how we get maybe kind of caught up in that social anxiety trap. So what exactly goes on when we feel anxious in a situation? I guess it's really important to look at an example in a social situation, right? So commonly, when we enter a social situation, it's quite common for us to have negative thoughts. I think a lot of you kind of shared really good negative thoughts like, I'm going to fail and everyone will laugh at me, or we might even make predictions like what Doreen shared, I can't do this, So we might make prediction of what is actually going to happen. And when we kind of have all these negative thoughts about the social situations or predictions about the social situations and the outcome of it, what's going to happen is that it will cause us to experience really anxious feelings and physical symptoms like what Tim shared previously. So of course, if we think that a situation is going to end up badly, naturally, it's very common for us to feel anxious, right? That's a very natural reaction. And then we might start trembling or our heart might start racing. So these are very common reactions that comes out from how we see a situation or the thoughts that we may have in a social situation. And once we start feeling anxious and have all these physical symptoms, then the more we experience it, the more we might start to pay attention to it. And that's like what, Tim and some of you have shared, the spotlight effect. I think many of us might experience that, the more we blush, the more we actually may kind of pay attention to the hotness in our cheeks, and the more we may kind of touch it to kind of soothe it, to calm it down, or to lower the temperature, or to hide it even. And that's when our attention starts focusing inward. So we actually very maybe unconsciously shift our attention from the external environment to what's going on inside us, right? And I think that's what you all said Victor was doing as well, right? He was kind of very in deep in his thoughts and kind of focusing a lot on himself. And that's when the spotlight effect happened, right? Because our attention can't really be in two places. It can really only be in one place. So if it's inward, then it's not focusing outward. So therefore, the more we focus on ourselves, the more we actually feel all these symptoms, right? And the more we focus on ourselves, the more we try to do things that might actually cause us to feel better, right? So looking at Victor again, he actually maybe exited the situation, right? So he stepped down from the podium. And these are what we call safety behaviors. And safety behaviors are really natural behaviors that we adopt to keep us safe. So of course, if a situation is anxiety-provoking, we would then naturally try to kind of, run away, or we might try to kind of maybe avoid showing our blush right on our face, or we might try to hide our hands so people don't see us trembling. And these are very natural safety behaviors that comes along when we feel anxious. But what that does is that, it makes us feel, sometimes when we do all these safety behaviors, it makes us even more focused on ourselves. Or it may cause us to believe more of these negative thoughts, like, oh yeah, they are really looking at me, I really cannot do it. And then we end up in this state of anxiety, and we end up getting caught in this trap. So looking at a specific example, post COVID-19 and even during the circuit breaker, I think what we often, or maybe one interesting phenomenon that we have noticed during the circuit breaker and even after phase 2 is that although it's quite common for a number of people to start experiencing maybe higher rates of low mood and anxiety, personally, I have a few clients who experience social anxiety, but actually they end up feeling better during circuit breaker and during phase 2. So, for example, one of my clients, and let's call him Mr. Tan. This is not his real name, but for the example, we're going to call him Mr. Tan. And I just want to share Mr. Tan's story with you. So, Mr. Tan was actually is somebody who's actually suffering from social anxiety for many years, and he was really quite afraid to even go out to the shopping malls for quite a few years now. But during the circuit breaker and even post-circuit breaker, he actually managed to go out to the coffee shop to buy food, to buy coffee, and he even managed to, attend 5 interviews, and he did so well that he even received 3 job offers. So I guess we were just really curious, what is going on? Did Mr. Tan, somehow manage to overcome social anxiety overnight? So we're really trying to figure out what was really happening that really made Mr. Tan feel better in such a short period of time that he was actually able to do all these things that he would have felt anxious before the circuit breaker and before phase 2. So we tried to kind of draw out Mr. Tan's trap as well, just to kind of maybe understand a bit more of what's going on. So when Mr. Tan entered a situation, he was saying that the thoughts still exist. He still thinks that, people would say at him, he might do something stupid, he will embarrass himself, people would think that he's weird. And he still believes very strongly that the social situations are scary. And then naturally, when he thinks so and predict the outcome of the social situation, he actually still feels anxious, and he will still have these physical symptoms, and he still experienced the spotlight effect, and his attention was still pretty much quite inward. But all of this actually pretty much changed and stopped when he started adopting some safety behaviors, right? So actually, what we realized is that Mr. Tan actually adopted a whole range of safety behaviors to help him overcome these social situations. So can you all kind of predict or think about what kind of social safety behaviors did Mr. Tan use to help him, feel less anxious in this situation during COVID-19, during the circuit breaker, and even post-circuit breaker? Can anyone think of anything that he did that might? Yes, that's right, Sarah. Absolutely. So what Mr. Tan did was he actually wore a mask, right? And when he started wearing a mask, he started realizing that his negative thoughts might not be quite true, right? Because nobody was able to identify him. So even if he blushed, or even if he said something stupid or foolish, or he embarrassed himself, nobody was going to notice him or identify him or remember him. So he started feeling slightly more confident in the social situation. Also, like what Sandra said, exactly, because of safe distancing, he was able to avoid social situations and people. So even when he did his interviews, he did it online, right? So he didn't have to go out, he didn't have to take a bus, he didn't have to meet people in the office space, and didn't have to meet people face to face. And even when he did his interviews, he was also wearing a mask, right? So when I asked Mr. Tan, whether he was able to do all these things without the mask, he actually said no. And I asked him why. He said, because he would embarrass himself and it is scary. So what this tells us is that actually what has really changed over here was not that Mr. Tan's social anxiety has gone away, but it really shows us the power of safety behaviors, right? That it makes us feel better in the short run as a result of reduced triggers. However, what do you think will happen when Mr. Tan stopped wearing the mask? Or what do you think will happen if, circuit breaker is no longer, COVID-19 is no longer here, and then he has to go out and he cannot practice safe distancing anymore? Do you think that life will get back to normal and he can continue kind of going on, or do you think he will experience some level of anxiety again? And I think many of you will agree that in the long run, even post COVID-19 and post circuit breaker, and when he starts going out into social situations and stops wearing the mask, he will actually return to feeling quite anxious. So this also shows us that actually, although safety behaviors are helpful in the short run, paradoxically in the long run, it actually causes us to feel more anxious because it really strengthens our beliefs that social situations are scary. That's why I must hide myself by wearing a mask, right? And that's why I must avoid these situations because it is so scary. And it doesn't give us a chance to test out our beliefs. So we're going to continue going on about our life thinking that social situations are scary and we must hide ourselves. Right? So once we no longer have to wear the mask, then I guess, Mr. Tan would start feeling anxious because his beliefs have not really changed. Right? And I think more importantly, what this paradoxical track also tells us is that actually the only thing that has changed is Mr. Tan's safety behavior. Right? But with that safety behavior, he was able to do so much more. He was able to perform in these social situations. So it tells us that actually, inherently, he has that ability to perform in that situation, and he has the competency to get the job that he wants. But it's really his beliefs about the social situation and, the accompanying anxiety and the attention that he places on himself that's causing him to experience anxiety and causing him to believe that he cannot do it. So then let's have to think about what can we do about this? Like, how can we break this trap? So I think the first thing that we can work on, in breaking the trap is kind of focusing on the negative thoughts. And I think in our previous forums, we have talked a lot about what to do with the thoughts and what can we do about them. In particular, for social situations, what we want to be very mindful of is the I feel it is thought. So the I feel it is thought is quite common. For example, like Mr. Tan, his thought might be, I feel it is scary, so it is going to be scary, right? Or I feel I'm not going to do well, so or rather I feel scared, so it is going to end up badly. So it's this feeling and prediction thought that we want to catch, because I think what we have kind of mentioned in our previous sessions as well is that just because we feel and we think something doesn't mean it's going to be true. So it's definitely important to catch this thought and then, catch them and then challenge them, right? So once we catch and challenge these thoughts, then naturally, we will feel less anxious. We will also focus on ourselves less, and then we will adopt less safety behavior, right? So we can begin to break this cycle. The next thing that we can do is to really address the self-focus attention or the spotlight effect. So I think the main thing about social anxiety is really this spotlight effect, right? Is that once we enter a social situation, we get so anxious that we start thinking that, oh, there's a spotlight on us and everyone, is we're in the center of attention in every social group, and people are just going to look at us and stare at us quite a lot, right? But sometimes, actually that's more a feeling, right? It's more a feeling than... So I think it is more a feeling than what it actually really is. So we want to catch and be aware of that as well. So what we can do is to, what we call it attention refocusing. So we want to kind of try to refocus our attention whenever we feel that it's kind of quite inward. And like I mentioned earlier, our attention is... So what I said earlier is that our attention can only be in two places. So the first place our attention can be is quite inward. So that happens when we are focusing on ourselves. right? The other place that our attention can be is actually outward, right? And that's where we kind of focus on our environment or, on the sounds that we can hear. And I think, sometimes we may have experienced this, right? When our attention is focused on the external environment or the person that we're talking to rather than our thoughts and our emotions, we actually end up, feeling more comfortable and able to perform better in a social situation. For example, if, have you ever kind of experienced the difference between talking to someone familiar, someone that you really know and you feel comfortable with, like a loved one, as compared to talking to a stranger? Which one is easier? I think many of you might share the same thought that actually talking to someone you know and someone you're comfortable with is actually much easier and much comfortable for you. And actually, why is that so? So I think that when we are talking to someone familiar, we actually don't really pay so much attention to, what's going on in our mind, or, or we're actually not kind of paying a lot of attention to what they might perceive us, and we're not so caught up in our thoughts, and we don't really focus a lot on, the actions that we are, doing or what we're saying. But when we are talking to a stranger, we actually get a bit more, maybe more mindful about what we're saying and how we are, acting. And that's when our attention are focused more inward. So we can see the difference between these two, example is that when we are talking to someone that is more comfortable and our attention is focused on that person or externally, we actually feel more comfortable in social situations. So what we can do here is really try to switch our attention whenever we notice that it's getting more inward and self-focused. What we would like to do is then practice to kind of focus on the environment. So shifting our self-focused attention to more external focused attention. Right. And I think this is sometimes quite hard to do. So practicing really helps. And sometimes, even with practicing, it can be quite difficult, which is completely normal. So if you need support, do let us know, and then maybe we can kind of guide you through this, right? And kind of moving on to the, the last thing that we can do when we feel anxious in a social situation. Earlier we mentioned a lot about safety behaviors and how safety behaviors actually cause us to feel much more anxious in a social situation, right? So from Mr. Tan, or for any of us who are feeling anxious in a social situation, what we can kind of do is to then do the opposite of what the I think, I feel thought is making us do, right? So if it's telling us that, a social situation is scary, what we want to do is really then go out in our own pace and in our comfort level and test that out, right? So we might want to consider dropping some safety behaviors. We might want to kind of continue socializing and try to kind of take it step by step, and continue doing things that are really quite opposite of what the social anxiety is telling us. Because only when we're able to do that, only when we are able to test out certain beliefs that we have, then we can know for sure, whether it is really scary or not. And only then we know that actually we can actually face something we think is scary, and then we can slowly build up our confidence, and we can slowly, face the things that kind of scares us in social situation. So we want to be mindful about dropping certain safety behaviors, because once we drop the safety behaviors, then slowly, once the beliefs and the negative thoughts, become lesser, then we might kind of feel less anxious, and then the self-focus of attention becomes lesser as well. Then we can slowly break this cycle. So I know a lot of us might think that, it's not easy to break the safety behavior, or it's not easy to just go out. And that is very true. So what we kind of want to share with you, one last technique is what we call, taking a step approach or a graded approach. And that really tells us that, when we want to achieve a goal, we want to try taking it one step at a time, right? So what we might want to do is that we might want to kind of think about what is the end goal we have in mind, and then break it down into a lot smaller, more achievable steps. So for example, if your end goal is that, you may want to kind of go out and maybe meet some friends, for a meal or something like that, then you might want to break it down into smaller steps. For example, we might want to start talking to friends on Zoom without the video switched on first. And then we might want to then maybe take the next step once we are more comfortable with the first, and then we might want to kind of talk to friends on Zoom with the video switched on. And then finally, we might want to kind of go out alone for a short walk first before we're able to then think about our end goal, which is to kind of, go out with our friends for a meal, right? So hopefully, doing all these may kind of help us maybe cope with our social anxiety a bit better, or overcome, our social anxiety. And we just kind of want to show you again, how Victor in our first video actually managed to kind of use some of these steps to kind of overcome his anxiety in his social situation. So let's kind of go back to Victor and let's see what he does to overcome, his performance anxiety or his anxiety when he was giving the speech or the talk.
So who can give me an example? Breathe in, and then I want you to breathe out through your mouth. Okay, so let's go again. 1. Okay, go something like big bad wolf.
The big bad wolf. All the better to eat you up. A woodsman was walking past by Grandma's house. He saw the big bad wolf asleep.
Right, so just to give credit to MOE for this really good video. I think, we saw that actually what helped Victor overcome his fear of, public performance, of public speaking in a social situation was really firstly, what he did with his teacher was kind of practicing some breathing and also, really taking it step by step. So he was practicing in the toilet and then in his classroom and then, finally kind of giving that speech on stage in front of his friends and peers. And I think what I want to say is that actually for social situations, it's definitely, or social anxiety is actually quite scary sometimes. But over time, with using all these tips and tricks and getting the support of someone we trust and really kind of putting ourselves out there and taking the situations step by step and then facing our fears, hopefully, that might help us, overcome the social anxiety bit by bit, and then eventually we might be able to face our fears, right? So with that, we actually come to the end of our sharing for today, and just wanted to kind of say that, social anxiety sometimes can actually cause us to feel quite debilitating, and we can also experience some associated mental health difficulties with social anxiety, and sometimes when it becomes quite serious, it can, affect us quite a lot. So here are some helplines that you can call if you feel really affected by social anxiety or any other kind of associated difficulties from it. And you can also give us a call at our counseling hotline. Of course, if you're in immediate harm, do go to the emergency medical services or approach your nearest A&E. Right? And with that, we'd like to move on to our question and answer segment that our moderator has kind of helped us compile all your questions on the slide, so we're gonna kind of look at them. But thanks for sharing all your thoughts and asking all the questions on the chat box.
Yeah, there's some really good, nice conversations happening in the chat.
Yeah. Okay, so kind of just moving quickly into the questions. Firstly, how is social anxiety different from panic attack?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's a bit of a question as well. Okay, we'll get to that. In terms of social anxiety, how is it different from panic attack? It's a really good question. I think earlier on we said that social anxiety can kind of coexist with panic symptoms, right? And I guess I've been thinking, I wonder whether the main difference is that social anxiety tends to be triggered by a social situation. So when you're going to come into contact with someone else, or you're going to be in front of a crowd, so in a social situation. I wonder whether the difference then is that panic attacks can happen in the company of others, but it can also happen when you are kind of on your own as an individual, say in a room on your own, for example. So I wonder whether that's one of the main differences. Pauline, I wonder whether there's anything else that comes to mind.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right, Tim. I think the main difference is really the trigger. So what causes the anxiety? Also, I would think that for a panic attack, actually, it can be slightly different from social anxiety in the sense that usually for people who are experiencing panic attacks, it lasts for about 10 to 15 minutes. And there's always the thought that, I'm going to choke or I'm going to die because of the breathlessness, or because, they feel that they cannot really breathe, because when they get a panic attack, they actually feel a lot more physiological symptoms. And sometimes in social anxiety, yes, you may feel anxious, but it's not to the extent, and maybe sometimes you will not really think that, you're going to die from the social anxiety, right? So I would think maybe that might be also one of the main key difference as well.
Yeah, certainly. And I think certainly, and that maybe leads on to the second one on, is social anxiety equals phobia about people? I wonder whether one of the key things maybe in social anxiety is this fear of being evaluated. Yeah, I think that's some of the discussion that was going on in the chat actually was about that, the fear of being judged, the fear of being evaluated. And so, yes, I think it is, in a way, it is a phobia about people, although I wonder whether it's kind of phobia when surrounded by people, maybe, and the fear and the phobia of being evaluated by people. Would that be fair to say, you think?
Definitely. And I think like you mentioned earlier in our slides as well, with the fear of evaluation, we actually then have the spotlight effect. So I think sometimes I guess another key difference is that when we feel socially anxious in a crowd or with people, we actually think that, there's a spotlight effect on us and a lot of people are looking at us. Whereas that's not so much in a panic attack. I think maybe sometimes you may feel like that in a panic attack, but I think that may be not one of the key distinctive, thing that we may experience in a panic attack.
Yeah.
Okay, kind of moving on to the next question. Is social anxiety equals fear about people?
Yeah, I think we kind of answered that a little bit just now already. Not so much, maybe, I think there is a bit of that, certainly, but maybe I would say kind of a phobia of being around people and being negatively evaluated by people. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So are safety behaviors triggered by fight or flight mode? I think that it can be triggered by fight or flight mode, definitely. It can be quite an innate response. But also, I guess the thing about safety behaviors is that sometimes it can be, quite conscious as well. So we know why we're doing it. Whereas fight or flight mode can be quite instinctive. Definitely can be triggered by it, because I think anxiety is triggered by fight or flight mode, and therefore, because we feel anxious, then we adopt some safety behaviors. Okay, kind of moving on. Do you think the way Singaporeans are raised with judgment or discipline by family members are a factor in causing social anxiety? And can adults change their behaviors to prevent social anxiety? Wow, that's a big one.
This is a really big question. Yeah, maybe let me have a go at it, and then Pauline, you can always add on.
Yeah, you can try. Yeah.
I think certainly. I think it's more than it is. I guess it is parents at some level, but it's certainly the wider family, and then we think about societal expectations as well and cultural expectations. I think certainly all these factors can feed into, remember just now when Pauline showed the negative thoughts, right? I think all these factors, how society judges people, how our culture perceives people, evaluates people, I think all of that can certainly raise the vulnerability or the risk of developing these negative thoughts growing up. I think that's certainly the case. Yeah, and I think someone in the chat also mentioned like school, right? But I think maybe all of us are conditioned maybe in school where, if we say something silly or not quite right, then it's kind of immediately reinforced with people laughing at us and stuff like that, right? It's quite a normal response in a way. But we can see how instances like that when we are young can certainly feed into developing some of these negative thoughts and very fearful thoughts as we grow up. Yeah, and I think that's a lot of what the chat that has been going on in the chat box has been about. Yeah. Yeah, I wonder whether you have
definitely.
any other thoughts on that, Pauline.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely echo what you're saying, and I think when we talk about the fear of being evaluated by people,
Mm,
sometimes that can be a result of how we are raised, or that when you mention, like, Singaporeans are raised with judgment. I think over time that may then cause us to kind of be quite afraid of being judged or being evaluated, and then entering social situations, and we may have such predictions that people are going to judge us, and then they're going to evaluate us. Hence, very naturally, we then have that fear of being judged, and then we would naturally have that anxiety around it. So definitely,
yeah,
yeah. Do you
yeah.
think
I think
adults can change?
yeah.
Go on, go on.
No, sorry. Go on, Pauline.
Oh no, I was just going to move on to the next question, so you can jump in. Yeah.
No, I think what would be just a kind of final thought I had. Actually, the prevalence statistic that
Yes.
I showed just now in one of the earlier
Mm,
slides. I believe that was quite a global study, but it would be interesting to
mm,
see whether different cultures have got different
mm.
prevalence rates for social anxiety,
Yeah,
because that might answer a little bit of this question number 4 on whether there are
definitely.
cultural differences. Yeah,
Yeah. Right.
a
Okay.
really
So
interesting
part.
question.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So part of the 4B, I guess, can adults change their behaviors to prevent social anxiety? I guess we just all have to. I think maybe not so much of adults, but I guess as people, we just have to really be just mindful about the impact perhaps of what we have on others, and also I guess if we have social anxiety, then like mentioned in our previous slide set, sometimes changing our behavior would have an impact on our anxiety in social situations.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to the next question. How is continuing socializing a way of refocusing? All right, I guess in the earlier slide, all right, so I guess it's about the when we talked about the trap, right? Like I guess this question is referring to two different things. So one is on refocusing of attention, and the other one is the safety behavior. So I think this is a good question into kind of like how that's different. And I guess just to clarify, actually, continuing socializing is more a safety behavior. It's more like a behavior rather than refocusing of attention. I think they're quite different. So refocusing of attention is really kind of it's really not basing, but it's really understanding where our attention is right now at this moment. So, for example, all of you sitting here, maybe sometimes, or maybe for a while during our talk, maybe your attention was on us or on our voices, but maybe sometimes you might find your attention kind of drifting out and moving more inwards to your thoughts, or how you're feeling. So that's what we call about our attention, and being mindful about where our attention is at, and kind of when we are in a social situation, a lot of times our attention is quite inward, right? So it's quite focused on our thought process, like, okay, are they evaluating me, or this is going to end badly, or I can't do it, right? So what we want to do is refocus that attention to be more outward, right? So more on like person talking, or the person's voice, or what the person is saying. Whereas continuing socializing is just one of the ways that we can break the cycle, and it's one of the ways that we can drop our safety behavior. So if our safety behavior is asking us to avoid situations or social situations, then what we want to do is we do the opposite of it and continue socializing. So I think thanks for asking that question. I think it's really good that we can clarify the difference between those two. Team, I wonder if you have anything else to add, or you want to move on to the
no,
next question?
I think that's brilliant.
Okay, right. So next question: what is hikikomori also social anxiety?
I am not fully sure what.
Yeah, I would have to admit that actually, I don't know what hikikomori is. So if you know what it is, like, please, let us know in the chat box.
Yeah.
I think that's a Japanese. It's a Japanese word for a certain type of maybe condition of anxiety.
Yeah. Possibly. I'm not fully sure. Maybe we can go on to the next question first and
Yes.
see if anybody can help us
Yes.
understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please, can you explain how step 2 is a progressive step to step 3? I think that's a really good question. So how is making a video call with people, a progressive step to going out alone for a walk? I think maybe intuitively it doesn't seem like it is a progressive step. But I guess when we are socially anxious, sometimes we actually, like what Tim said, right? The accompanying associated maybe fear is going out the house, right? So sometimes when we want to go out and meet our friends for a meal, actually besides being afraid of meeting our friends or being in social situations, what we're actually really afraid also is going out of the house and meeting strangers, or maybe bumping into other people and then not knowing what to do in that situation. So a lot of times the fear of going out is actually associated with social anxiety. So hence, sometimes before we even want to go out and meet our friends for a meal, we do encourage people to maybe go out alone first for a walk, so that you put themselves in a less threatening social situation first, right? And then slowly kind of going into meeting a friend for a meal. The next question: if a child is having social anxiety, how can we help?
Yeah, I think Pauline, you've shared quite a few strategies, I think, with us on this. I think quite similar to the video, right? If we think about the video, we can see that there were things that helped the little boy. One of them would be encouraging a child, or anyone for that matter, to kind of face some of their fears, rather than, what can sometimes happen is when there's one negative outcome, something goes really bad, a presentation goes badly, then we never do presentations again, because that's what we naturally do as human beings. But one of the best things to do is actually maybe to engage the help of a friend. Like in the case of the video, it was the teacher who helped. So I think, maybe you can engage a friend or engage an adult to kind of facilitate the process of putting the child in that fearful situation, to try to see whether the child can try it out again, and to see whether the outcome may be a bit different, and dropping the safety behaviors during that time.
Definitely. Definitely agree with Tim, and I think we have shared quite a few tips and tricks. I think that for a child, maybe it's just it's not a different process, but maybe it's just adapting these tips and tricks for them, right? And is social anxiety treatable? I guess from what we see, in the model of social anxiety that we share, and also with Victor, the child, actually it can be overcome, and that's definitely a possibility of kind of feeling less anxious in social situations and facing the feared social situations over time. So it's really taking it step by step and really kind of breaking down bits of the model, so that we feel less anxious over time.
Final question, is that right?
Yes.
Maybe we have a few more in the chat, I'm not sure. Final question. Is social anxiety caused by biological factors or just psychological? Is it related to personality traits? Wow, what a big question.
Yeah, that's a really big one.
It's a really big question. I think Pauline add on as well. I think it would be fair to say that for most anxieties, most mental health conditions, I think it's a complex interaction between all of these I mentioned in the question. I think certainly there are some biological factors. There are certainly psychological factors that we mentioned today in the model. And certain personality traits as well might make you more vulnerable to developing social anxiety. I think that's probably fair to say. I think I saw in the chat box neuroticism. Is that right? Someone mentioned that. Yeah, I think there is some evidence to suggest people who score highly on that trait might be more anxious in general. But again, I think it's quite hard to say. It's probably a very complex interaction between all of these factors. Yeah,
definitely. I think Tim, you answered it really well. It's definitely multiple factors. That's why we always look at the biopsychosocial factors that causes social anxiety or even other mental health symptoms. So it's a big question. I think even research may not really have may not be able to kind of accurately answer it. But I think regardless of whether it's caused by biological factors or psychological or even personality traits, I think from what we kind of seen in the model, it certainly can be kind of overcome. If we look at the different things that's kind of maintaining it and causing it in social situations. Maybe we take the last question, and I think it's another big question.
Yeah, it's another big one. These are really good questions.
Yeah, really good question. Can you talk more about how people with conditions like autism, ADHD, depression are more prone to social anxiety? And you're going to give it a go. You look like you are thinking about it.
I'm thinking about it.
I think maybe
I feel like there's a wealth of knowledge here. Actually, I'm sure people can chip in the chat box as well. Let me have a think. I think in the case of depression, I think I can kind of see how having depression can make you more prone to social anxiety. Because I suppose in kind of in general, right? When someone is depressed, what we tend to do when we are depressed is we tend to stay indoors, right? We tend to isolate ourselves. We tend to just want to be on our own and those kind of things. And you can see how that kind of fits into the kind of, in a way, the behaviors that lead us to avoid social situations. So you can imagine for someone who's depressed over a long period of time, unfortunately, they might have been isolated for a long period of time as well. That can happen. And I think when you're isolated for a long period of time, then certainly when it comes to social interaction again, it can be much, much harder to kind of get the energy and the desire to interact with people again. So in that sense, that can increase social anxiety symptoms as well. Yeah, that's one way. Probably not sure if you can have other...
Yeah, I think maybe for like the more neurodevelopmental like conditions like autism and ADHD, I think that it definitely can cause more social anxiety. I think some of the conditions or maybe some of the presentations of autism, for example, not being able to or maybe having difficulties reading social situations or reading understanding social rules, understanding social cues. I think all these kind of may cause us to feel a bit more anxious when we enter social situations because we may not be really quite certain about, what can we do in this social situation. And I think sometimes, when we're in a social situation and when we are communicating with people, there's a lot of, interpretations and that we have to make, right? And it's not so clear cut, isn't it?
Yeah. There's a lot of social cues, right?
Yes,
as well,
that we have to kind of read. But sometimes this may be difficult for maybe people with neurodevelopmental conditions to pick up. It may be quite hard for them to be aware of it. So they may definitely maybe feel a bit more anxious in social situations. And I think maybe in their experience, I think sometimes maybe they have experienced times where people actually kind of looked at them or evaluated them and judged them. And that may cause them to then have more beliefs about social situations and interpretations. I guess Wesley is saying that, autistic people have strange behaviors in society's perception, although that may not be completely true. Hence, maybe then they might experience more of that spotlight effect. Right? And then that might kind of cause them to feel more anxious in social situations. So I completely agree that it's definitely something that we all have to be quite mindful about, and also maybe just really more accepting, right, to people with differences, because we are all different, right?
Yeah, certainly.
Okay, so I think
that's really nice. I hope that was helpful. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I hope that was helpful, and I'm not sure, T, whether you have anything else you want to chip in on the neurodevelopmental stuff.
No, not particularly. I think,
I think we do have to admit that we are not experts in like autism or ADHD over here, so it's really kind of sort of based on our understanding. But I think these are really good conversations to have. So we do hope to kind of encourage more of them and do continue kind of having those thoughts and thinking about them. Before we end, we do have, we just wanted to share a bit more about our other talks. So we just wanted to also let you guys know of the MyMentalHealth website that is, developed by Domestic Foundation, and we have written quite a lot of articles on this, on the different topics of anxiety and depression, and there's a lot of resources there as well. If you want to kind of ask us more questions but didn't have the chance to, you can also go on there and click on the Ask the Expert button, and then you can just email us some questions as well. Just wanted to share the next talk that we have next week on Tuesday. It will be a talk on OCD. So if you found today's talk helpful, and if you want to find out more about other anxiety disorders, then feel free to kind of go onto the link below or scan your QR code to sign up for the talk. So it will be the same time next week. Right. And lastly, we really appreciate any of your feedback that you have for us today so that we can continue to really improve our talk and also make the talks more relevant for you. So if you have 1 minute, please click on the link that our moderator has shared in the chat box, or go on to, or use your phone and scan the QR code here. And really just quite quickly, really appreciate if you could just fill out the feedback form for us. And if you have any more questions or you want to kind of speak to us more, then you can email us at contact@viria.org.sg, or you can also, connect with us on our other social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn as well. Thanks, everyone.